And thanks for attending the sixth session of this conference. First of all, I would like to thank Rogerio for the invitation, for being here. Even though I work in a completely different field. As you probably know, and Rogerio has mentioned several times before, the original plan was to have a debate today between Professors Panateri and Rodriguez Velasco. Unfortunately, Professor Rodriguez Velasco had to step down due to personal reasons. So today we will only have one presentation. This means that we will have an extended time for Professor Panateri to present his paper, and that we will have an extended time for questions. So I hope this will be as lively as the originally planned debate would have been. Without further ado, let me introduce Professor Daniel Alberto Panateri from the Consejo Nacional de Investigaciones Científicas of Argentina, who will be presenting a paper under the name Political Bodies and Nature and Judicial Torture in the Middle Ages. Professor Panateri, all yours.
Well, first of all, thank you all you guys for being there. And of course, thank you, Rogerio, for this invitation, and to Julián for being the chair of this diminished session. Also, I will take an extra time, so because I already had my presentation, so I will try to give you some minutes extra for resting or something after this. Well, this paper aims to analyze how Alfonso's legal discourse built a system in which the concept of señor natural and the institute of torture work as a mechanism to legislate the resistance. To achieve this, I would like to divide my exposition into three parts. In the introduction, I would like to I will establish the diachronic aspects of the concept of nature and the institute of torture, including the medieval reception of Roman law. Secondly, I will settle the rhetorical construction that Partidas made between señor natural and desnaturación, in order to understand the whole fictional system that provides the meaning of the reflection. Finally, I will describe the relationship between nature and torture, taking into account this legislation of resistance that I'm trying to explain. In 43 before Christ, Praetor Quintus Gallus was tortured servilem in modum by order of Octavius. The reason that led the juridical process was an alleged conspiracy. This sin and many others were commonplace from the end of the Republic onwards. Well, actually, it was not really that common, but something did start to happen that had not been contemplated before. Actually, at that time, the violation of the personal immunity of magistrates through quaestio servil was more an individual decision than a regular practice. However, this isolated example constitutes a good one about some changes in the Roman penal system that was beginning to turn into a new one where political control of the bodies was the goal. The difference was quite clear. During the Republican age, the inviolability of magistrates was secured by its dignity. In the Principate, immunity becomes more liable in face of crimen laesae majestatis. Such category work negatively, defined by who or what attacks it. This way of working was fundamental for its function. The indeterminacy of the crime expressed its capacity to exceed the limits of the law itself, and this process never stopped. During the Dominate, guarantees ceased, and citizens were left naked before imperial agents. Regarding the exceptions, crucial point in the discourse of law, even both soldiers and children under 14 years of age were subjects of torture when crimen laesae majestatis was evoked. One of the key points is the language. In the common use of torture, inquisitio, interrogatio, and indagatio were used as synonyms. Instruction and instruments were almost the same thing. Also, the words used to describe torture were starting to describe the whole process itself. Moreover, the field of the crimen lesa majestatis began to fill up with more and more categories, making it a blank space for the most diverse crimes, although treason remained its key. In addition, the generalized practice of torture reached witnesses. According to Jean Thomas, it is possible to say that the law changed into an unlimited imperium on all the bodies. In that sense, torture becomes generalized when it is institutionalized in the political arena. This instrument allowed for imperial control over the elites. Thus, what gives meaning to the extraordinary is not its rarity, but its possibility of existence. Finally, the inquisitorial system was imposed because this functioning overwhelmed the accusatory system by the concept of enormia, which had a full development during the Middle Ages. Nature didn't receive systematic attention from Roman jurists. Therefore, it is only possible to understand its functioning by the use that they made to elucidate other issues that concern them. Nature, indeed, had a preceding place to use gentium within the division of law. Otherwise, the a posteriori introduction of the common law of the people was not according to the natural law, but in rupture with it, or after, or against it. For Gaius, ius gentium was established according to naturalis ratio, while ius gentium divides rights, ius naturalis institutes an individuation of common rights. This was not an undesirable consequence, but how Roman jurists used to think the ius as sequential and contradictory formulas. The division between these fields constitutes the proper foundation of history as something cultural and human outside the immanent. The choice of this word is not by chance. During the imperial times, the war was the first action in the division because war created cities, that's society, maybe as a collateral effect. However, jus civile was not created as the third stage in the creative stairs of law. It was an internal part of the universal law where each city took one place for another according to certain rights. The functioning is that of common law particularized for each city. Thus, natural law is common to every living species, but ceased to be applied to humans in order to give place to the ius gentium. Civil law was a specific version of that unlimited by each city. For that reason, civil law was instituted, not natural. In that scenario, nature was placed as a legitimizing device. That's the reason for formulas such as secundum natura, contra natura, etc. As Cicero said, vera lex recta ratio, natura congruens sempitat. And this was what Jean Thomas called a fragmentary logic of argumentation. Nature was built as a universal, undefined key to serve human, social, and instituted law. Its universality gave it a status of truth and permanence, as Papiniano said, naturae veritas. However, none of these jurists said that the ground of the law was placed in nature, but in the civilian field, because nature is defined in that arena, since natural law has no other. Consequently, civil law defined nature through its use to solve proper civil concerns. So, civil law had no limits. The jurists or the legislators, in order to use a stronger image, no matter who carried out the functioning, were bound by positive laws only insofar as they passed them. Where nature occurs in the law, it appears as a physical obstacle, such as biology, age, etc. However, nature didn't establish norms, but gave the possibility to extend them outside the field of law. It was not a principle, but a useful device as the last resource to establish norms. In that sense, Jurists build their own thought to define the law autonomously from a philosophical approach. By instituta, nature was placed in the third stage in the summa divisio, between public and private law. The contradiction between the universality of nature and the tiny place that had in the law itself was solved through the introduction of fictio legis, which allowed nature into the law. This was a movement of discursive appropriation, but with concrete consequences. Hence, nature is away from both the individual and the cities, although the cities can control its use. Nature foreshadowed institutions and, at the same time, was defined by them. The functioning was that of an analogy without confusion. The truth of nature is not simulated by its image. There is an opposition between nature and the image of Neoplatonic rules. Truth must not and cannot be simulated. Thus, there is no more nature that one jurist can create. The discourse of law gave an original place to nature, being the external institution created by law and for the law. With the fathers of the church, this changed. Paulus said, well, actually, not nature, but the natural law was inscribed in the heart of men. Natural law was taken from its place and put into a new vision, that of divine law. During the Middle Ages, nature was given a new label and, why not, put into some limits. Nature was the same as God. This marked a propitious field to medieval thinkers that were able to maintain Roman principles within the context of the Christian anthropology that gave sense to the whole world. These limitations were the same as those applied to fiction. The need to conciliate the technique with God created the verba fictionis. But I think the task was not to limit the nature itself, which was a fiction for Roman jurists, but the denaturalization of the word that fictions carry. One of the resolutions was to recognize that law simulated facts, circa facto. Fiction was accepted in the Middle Ages, but only at one level and no more. I don't want to hassle you all with things you already know, and for reasons of time and space, well-defined juridical categories, I cannot develop the entire process that took place since the 12th century, but I want to analyze a little part of how Alfonso the Wise took all these elements to create his own theory of power and his own theory of resistance. Theory of control of resistance. In Siete Partidas, there are two related concepts to defining nature, natura and naturaleza. Naturaleza is defined by three elements: lordship, obligation, and totality, in the sense of cohesion. There are two dimensions to understand the concept of nature. On the one hand, the vertical one, the relationship between the king and the rest of the society. At the same time, this relationship needed the element of obligation to work. On the other hand, the horizontal one binds all the people together through living in the same land. As it said there, I just highlighted some part of the quotations. 10 maneras pusieron los sabios antiguos de naturaleza. La primera, la mejor, es la que dan los hombres a su señor natural, porque también ellos, como aquellos de cuyo linaje descienden, nacieron y fueron raigados y son de la tierra donde es el Señor. The first and the best one is that men have with their natural lord. And people, referring to the people, they are from the land where the Lord is. And the next one, there it is. Is this law is regarding about the friendship, and it says that natural amistad, de que decimos anteriormente, ¿no? En las leyes de este título se desata, the friendship, por algunas de aquellas razones que dijimos en esta sexta partida de este libro, porque puede hombre desheredar a los que descienden de él. La otra, que han por naturaleza, que son los que son de una tierra. Desatasen cuando algunos de ellos es manifiestamente enemigo de ella, o del Señor que la ha de gobernar, he de mantener en justicia, que pues es enemigo de la tierra, no han porque ser ninguno su amigo, por razón de naturaleza que había con él. At which those who are of the land had by nature that they should untie when some of them are manifestly enemies of it, or of the Lord, who is to govern it and maintain it in justice. Seeing he is an enemy of the land, no one should be his friend, by reason of the nature that was with the king. This is something that I will not develop, but this regulation of friendship is very attractive in this book. All the people who live in that land had to know and acknowledge the king is the greatest natural lord who occupies the political apex. Indeed, the obligation deriving from nature is stronger than the ones produced by vassalage. As said right there, naturaleza y vasallaje son los mayores debtos que hombre puede haber con su señor, que la naturaleza le tiene siempre atado para amarlo y no ir contra él, el vasallaje para servirle lealmente. Nature, nature and vassalage are the greatest obligations that man can have with his lord, because nature always binds him to love the Lord and not to go against him. The last one is a little long, so I just will read the highlighted parts. The wise man very rightly placed the king over his people in two ways. One, to the head of man, where the senses are born. The other, to the heart, where the anima of life is. For us, by the senses of the head, all the members of the body are commanded. So all the members of the kingdom are commanded and guided by the king's brain. And therefore, he's called the head of the people. Okay, there it is. God placed the king in the midst of the people to give equality and justice to all in common. Okay. The people are obliged to guard and defend the king, who is placed in their likeness and who is also a natural lord. For the lords come in many ways. The ones who come by nature are above all the rest of the lords, so that men have a greater obligation to take care of the king. So they are required to keep the king from themselves, not to kill him in any way. For he who do so would take away from God his vicar, and from the kingdom his head, and from the people his life. And for this they put it for the greatest treason that can be. The language used by Alfonso is not completely original. The concept of nature associated with loyalty by birth is recorded in many texts, in Crónica de Fonsi Imperatoris from the 12th century, or even in the Rebus Hispaniae. The dominus naturalis defined the political dominance based on land belonging. In those examples, nature linked dominance and politics by birth, but without the legal ground that was acquired in Siete Partidas. This is the key point of my talk, how these concepts work within the legal discourse to constitute a narrative complex where civil and penal law work together. In other words, the whole political relationship was framed into this space of law. Multiplying the notions needed, Siete Partidas place all the elements in the language of law. The division into natura and naturaleza corresponds to that. Thus, natura worked as the classical medieval definition, how things are created by God, while naturaleza, it's something close to natura, but created by men. There it is. Uno de los grandes debtos que los hombres pueden haber unos con los otros es naturaleza. Que bien como la natura los ayunta por linaje, así la naturaleza los hace ser como unos por luengo uso del leal amor, onde pues que de sus hablamos del debdo que han por naturaleza y por derecho, los aforados con los señores que los aforan, y de las otras cosas que pertenecen al estado de los hombres en general, queremos aquí decir del debdo que han los hombres, que han los naturales, con aquellos cuyos son por debdo de naturaleza. Demostraremos qué quiere decir naturaleza, el departimiento que hay entre la naturaleza, ¿no? One of the greatest obligations that men can have one to another is nature. Well, and finally, the division natura and naturaleza. Okay. In this quote, we can read that naturaleza tanto quiere decir como debdo que han los hombres unos con los otros por alguna derecha razón, en se amar, en se querer bien. El departimento que han entre natura y naturaleza es este. La natura es una virtud que hace ser todas las cosas en aquel estado que Dios las ordenó. Naturaleza es cosa que semella a la natura y que la ayuda a hacer y mantener todo lo que desciende de ella, ¿no? Nature is a virtue that causes all things to be in the state in which God arranged them. Nature is something that resembles natura and helps to be and to maintain all that descends from it. Natura remains in Latin into the Siete Partidas and refers to the physical realm insofar as it refers to the Aristotelian thesis rethought by Christian anthropology. On the other hand, the notions of obligations and fidelity are part of the speaker's linguistic universe at hand, pragmatics disposed to the field of public cohesion bonds. In consequence, naturaleza is the rational expression that jurists gave to the world created by natura. If natura is Deus, naturaleza es lo mismo que decir rey, where the maxim of juridification is expressed in the distinctions of nature and the way how someone can acquire it by crianza, caballería, tornarlo cristiano, moranza de 10 años, etc. Nature can not just by the fact of being born in some land, but also by living it during a period of time. This reveals a jurisdictional principle to define naturaleza. Indeed, natural is someone who was born in the land, as for instance, Jimenez Rada defined, but also there was a secondary consideration to use this adjective that only can be revealed by the discursive analysis of the entire text. Natural is someone who lived in the land of the natural law. Consequently, an individual may not be part of the natura by birth, but natural by naturaleza, which is defined by the presence of the señor natural, who secures the political bond. Finally, there is no territory itself, but people are defined by the Lord, and the Lord is defined by the presence of the people. The place where the Lord has power is defined by natura, but the relationship between people in there is defined by naturaleza, a legal concept with social implications. This functioning works excluding the spiritual context insofar as the Siete Partidas definition addressed to the political bonds between man and law. So nature is linked with the natural vernacular word natural, which derives from naturalis, to develop a civil quality in the noun natural. Siete Partidas confused private and public in Roman terms, but was aware of the operation implied by this confusion. Discursive strategy that Siete Partidas showed allowed a semantic split with consequences in meaning. The composition of its negation, the desnaturalización. The negative operation is impossible to natura, but not to its political derivation, the naturaleza. Alfonso created a penal social category from another civil, also social category. The meaning is simple. The desnaturado is someone who does not belong to the political and social body anymore. However, this figure, albeit complex, was used to combine the majestas, which was the king's prerogative. Thus, the counterpart of the concept of natura, that's its negation, referred to the first definition of natural bond, the one you have with the king, the most important one within the natural bond. Torture and majestas are useful to explain how the power relationship use the interrogation process of truth as the basis of a way to rule by the extraordinary. The application of torment under these parameters implied a concept of enormia, which allowed the indistinction between the individual bodies and the political body. This path from negotiated justice to hegemonic justice, created new criminal figures. Here we are able to see how the concept of nature worked by seizing the social bond that defined above. Torture is legislated in the Title 30. I'm not interested in developing this part. Instead, I would like to focus on the relationship that Alfonso established between torture and nature. In this sense, it is suffice to say that nothing is said about majesty or nature in that part of the Septima Partida. This title is almost a perfect translation from Digestum and Codex. There is also a large list of exceptions to torture, which includes kids, professors, knights, and magistrates of the king. This is known, very known. So I want to highlight just this specific exception about the councillors, especially of the king or of the common people of any city or town of the king, nor to the sons of the aforementioned. The criminal lese majestatis is developed in the Septima Partida, the second title, and it is put in the first place along with a long group of faults. The apparent homogeneity allows some historians to say that the incorporation of the voice criminal lese majestatis was a simple adequacy of words. However, I believe we are facing a discursive action to make legal Latin concepts easier to understand to the readers. Siete Partidas made a formula where majestas was said firstly, but recognizing the other ways of treason. Thus, Alfonso related the higher treason to the king with nature through the concept of desnaturalización. Far from a failed integration of Roman law into the Siete Partidas produced a synthesis between the Roman institute and the Hispanic legal tradition. The criminal who committed a crime against majestas was the only one who offended both God and Señor Natural. In this formula, the law remained the proper concept of majestas. As the second partida says, vicarios de Dios son los reyes en sus reinos. The king is set in the earth, in the place of God. The remaining question is why the proper law of torture did not include a place for criminals against acting against majestas. Moreover, what about the exceptions, especially for magistrates who are close to the king's body, to the very body of it? The answer could be found in some titles before the title 30 aforementioned. In the second title of that partida, Alfonso said that who commits a crime against majestas is automatically a desnatural. Consequently, the felon is described as a known person because he loses all his possessions and faces the infamia even after his death. This infamia reached his kin and descendants that were barred from reaching any position in the monarchical system. Even though the legislation of torture didn't use the crimen lese majestatis to define the practice, previously, in the same partida, the partidas had given the reading key to understand the whole system that I consider as one only thing. The desnaturado, apart from the political and social body, loses all his conditions. Even the exceptions that I read before must be read with this key, as the crime against the majestas suppresses all social conditions in order to deliver the individual body to the public justice system. Regardless, of course, of its age, profession, or place within society or in the bureaucratic royal system. The felon is less than the wanderer without Lord. He's pure biology bound to God, but separate from the political body where the Señor Natural rules. The felon has been detached from the political bond and is allowed to be punished servilem in modo. In Rome, nature and torture were not related because it was not needed. The changes in juridical and political thought that took place during the Middle Ages force us to reconsider not only the concepts, but the way in which these concepts work. Siete Partidas, on the other hand, built a narrative complex where the king was placed always as the very center of the jurisdictional system, and even more, the whole society, maybe. Alfonso had to put torture and nature together to construct a framework where the concept of Señor Natural and the Institute of Torture may work jointly. In other words, the wise king mixed torture and nature to build up a penal system over the same pattern of civil law. He could do this by bypassing the restrictions that the doctrinal concept of nature gave him. The reason for that was the inappropriateness of such formulation in an instrumental society, where attacking the one implied attacking the many. In this sense, the indistinction of biological bodies subjected to torture needed an extra concept that would make it possible to break through the group solidarities anchored in noble birth. The discourse of law became an instrument of transformation for Alfonso in his times. This can be read as a proof of the transition from negotiated to a hegemonic justice. In order to accomplish this, Siete Partidas created a juridical category based on the fact that the enemy is within. The goal was to create a form of social control of dissidents through the imperium over the bodies. More than pure language, this formulation was the condition to legislate the resistance. It is not coincidence that when the nobles rose up against Alfonso, who to extirpate all these evils that we have mentioned, we have made these laws that are written in this book for the service of God and for the common good of all those of our dominion, so that they may know and understand the law and know how to act according to it, and beware of doing wrong so that they do not fall into penalty. So these nobles, as I said, rose up against Alfonso, and they used as a just cause the fact that the king had trampled on the rights. These rich men didn't move against me by reason of right or injustice that I have to them, because I have never subjugated their rights, but I should have subjugated them. I really love this part. So just as the kings who raised them, they strove to undo this upbringing and to subjugate the kingdoms to some of them when they were as little children. Torture was a mechanism of control over the elites, with the king as the proper center of the social system. But the circle of application of torture worked as it became institutionalized in the political arena. Partidas was an element of dethroning, maybe not the main one, but one of importance. In this analysis, it is possible to see how Siete Partidas could change the whole penal system in order to avoid resistance, putting the king in the center of that system. Alfonso may be lost because he could not apply his own thought that he addressed as an advice to the emperor, what he wanted to be. According to nature, lordship does not want a companion, nor does it need one. The power he has is that he can make laws, and to have power such as this, it is necessary that he dominates the cavalries and that he distributes them and entrusts them to the caudillos, so that they love him and have them for him and by his hand in such a way they know him as their Lord. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Panateri, for a wonderful presentation. Before proceeding to the questions, Professor Paul Evangelisti asked me to introduce a comment for the previous session. So,
thanks. I have actually two questions for both Alexander and Panateri. I think about the previous Alexander lecture that speaking about the Augustinian foundation of the partidas, and the question, but it's both even for Daniel, if in the partidas we can find direct citation or indirect coming from the famous not only 19 book and 21 chapter of Civitatis Dei, but the chapter 4 of the 4 books that you know that is separate the justice of the power, the legitimate power acting with justice, and the power exercised without justice. The famous colloquium between Alexander Magnum and the thief, the pirates. This is the first, and the second one is direct to Daniel. That you know, torture, as you underlined a lot of during your lecture, is used to punish crimen lese majestatis, of course. And I want to know if in the partidas the use of superioritas or majoritas is testified, and if these terms are different. I thinking about this question coming direct from a special contribution of Schifolo, and I don't know if you know this article, that he discussed about the medieval majestas. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Alex, be my guest.
Oh. I think I'll be after you, but thank you for the question, but I fear that I haven't seen any citation in partidas, direct or indirect, from this place of Augustine. I should how to say? I should verify only, I think, 1 or 2 laws about what I am in doubt, but I feel that there isn't.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that it's possible to see in some laws something close to that, but not exactly the reproduction or a quotation from Augustine related to that. For example, in the distinction, you remember, Alex, in the second partida about the power by law and the power by fact. The hecho, especially for the emperor. No, you have that sort of distinction. Is
but in this distinction,
yes, go.
In this distinction, they say about yes, power de facto, power de jure, but power de facto is a mediator power, if I understand well.
What? Sorry, I didn't. I didn't got you the last words.
Militar, poder militar.
Military, yes, exactly. Military. For that's the reason why I said that this is something close you can have.
But yes.
This question, but I agree with you about the absence of the quotations from Augustine. And the second one, sorry, and the second one.
Superioritas and majoritas.
Read down your questions. What? Sorry. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. The superioritas. Yes, of course. That's a concept that is in Siete Partidas about. I presume without originality, of course, that it becomes from the sentence about the superior non reconocen, and the idea of the superioritas is, I will say that it's that it is put all over the partidas, because what I think, and this is my thesis, and I think that it's not completely original, of course, but I would like to say that it's that partidas is a complete narrative complex, also taking into account the very, very complex manuscript tradition, and the successive redactions that partidas had. But I think that the entire partidas is like a narrative complex about the law, and because mixing, well, in this presentation, I talk about Roman law and this relationship with partidas, but I think that partidas, especially in the second one, of course, had a lot of quotations and a lot of influence of the philosophical system, of course, the Aristotelian one, and as already Alex said, by the Arabic path. No, and I want to add to what Alex just said in his presentation, Averroes and Avicenna, no, because especially with the treatment of the treatise of the anima, no, because that which is what defined the body, the heart, or the anima. I put the brain into the translation, but it's not completely right.
But why not soul?
So in the Middle Ages, it has a spiritual meaning that I think it's not the meaning that you can find in the Aristotelian treatise.
But when Alfonso says about rational soul, which is a god,
once again,
about highest of the souls, the soul has three. The anima has three levels. The highest
yes,
one.
of course. There's just three levels, but in this part, this kind of anima, which is the sentidora, don't you? No, you know more.
No, racional.
Is the one who received all these senses, no, and move all the body and construct all this analogy when the king is put into that body, which is sometimes the people, sometimes other lords. This is something weird, but is the heart and the anima at the same time. But going back to the original question of Professor Evangelisti, I want to say that this concept is, and for that reason is that I said that this narrative complex itself, when it's impossible just to say, well, you have this definition here, but that definition is isolated from the rest of the partidas. That's my thesis. Okay, I can be wrong, of course, but I think that it's a very narrative complex. That's what I try to show with the last part, when you say, well, in that title, you cannot, you don't have an explicit definition about the criminal lesa majestatis regarding torture. But if you go some titles before that, you can find a definition that you can use to apply torture and this, taking into account the criminal lesa majestatis. And the superioritas as a notion is in the whole siete partidas. That's what I think. Thank you.
Well, I was hoping for a lively debate, and I think we had one. Any other questions for Professor Panateri or Alex?
Professor Pennington raised their hands.
Exactly.
Okay. Professor Pennington, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a very good lecture. I'm curious, this is partially because of my own work. The jurists of the Jus Commune had a lot to say about torture. And there are even a few cases that I know about in Spain where torture was used against defendants. My question is, from what I know, there is remarkably little about torture in this Siete Partites. That is very little that is drawn from the Jus Commune. And it raises two questions. Was torture very, very rare in Spanish court cases? And do you have an explanation of why so little about torture appears in the Siete Partites?
Okay, that's it. The first one, I think it's very easy for me because I don't study justice. So I will do something that it's not very nice, but in Argentina we'll say threw the ball outside the court. Because I don't study justice, I don't study the courts, or the functioning of the courts. But as I said at the very end of my presentation, I think that the relationship between Partidas and its promulgation during the 13th century and the Realpolitik, in a way to say, no, of the governor of the Alfonso's government can explain that. No, I think that this, well, we should wait some a couple of years or centuries to find these processes. But I don't have a specific answer, but I think that it was about politics. Because as I said, in the end, he really couldn't put the Siete Partidas as what he wanted, as the only book of law to the entire peninsula. And I think that this how to say it, well, this political thing was that makes the juridical reformation, you know, way to speak, an impossible movement for that moment. Also, Alex have talked about the roses and the how the novel, rose up against Alfonso in the 72, and also in the last decade of his life in the 82. And I think that this is the major explanation. And once again, I didn't write it down. Your second question was about, sorry. Okay, I got lost.
The use of torture in Spanish courts, which if you haven't been studying Spanish courts, you may not have an answer for me.
Okay, yes, but you had a second question, or I go.
No, the second question, well, is a combination of questions.
Okay.
Why was there so little about torture in the Siete Partites? My answer to that question, if I may give my answer, is that the Jus Commune is operating alongside the Siete Partites. The Siete Partites was not the only legal system, the only book to follow, but that the books of Roman law, the books of canon law, the commentaries on Roman law, the commentaries on canon law were operating as libri legales alongside the.
Yes, yes, of course, I agree with you, and that's the best answer that I can give. But also, thank you, Ken. But no, the thing is that actually that's right in the practical sense, but it was not in the theoretical sense, because Partidas wanted to be the only book of law in his time. No, I'm putting a subject mentality into a book. Sorry about that, but it's so to make easier the answer. So and this is very important because also Alfonso forbidden the use of the common law in courts. So in the practical sense, yes, you're right, but in the theoretical sense, by Partidas, I think that the best explanation that I have is that I have no answer to that. Why that tiny place to the torture? That's a very good question that I made myself several times. But I don't know. I think that imposing the inquisitorial system, it was something very tough to do. In that time, I presume, but yes, of course, that these struggles for these struggles against the nobles and other courts, jurisdictions, of course, that makes something in the application itself. But why is not more about that in the book? That it's a remaining question. So thank you, Professor.
Any other questions for Daniel? No? Well, I don't know what you would like to do. I have one question, the very small comment that I can make from your presentation, given that I work with something completely different, as Icelandic and Norwegian laws, so nothing to do here. Is that you
by Eric Wolf, we can say that it's the same, no? You know that.
Well,
because
I'm not entirely sure about that.
Norway and Iceland, Eric Wolf said that.
Well, certainly there are some influences going on, but there are certainly some influences, but yeah, I'm not the person to say that. In any case,
just trying to get you into the
drag me
Go
into
ahead.
this world. Yes. You mentioned that there are some ways of acquiring the status of natural in the law. It is done in a similar fashion as in Roman laws, using fictions, like when a slave is emancipated or something like that.
So sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
This acquisition of the status of natural is done by using fictions, as it was in Roman law with the slaves when they were released.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question. The first answer is no, but there's in Partidas, and I think that it's part of this construction of this narrative complex, where the Alfonso, or as Alex said, the jurists of the scriptorium, have used the verba fictionis all the time to explain and to make easier something. So you have the use of some verba fictionis, especially to the anti-certain bonds, regarding these ways of acquisition of naturaleza. But it's not the classical, in Hispanic terms, fictio legis functioning there, like bien así como, for example, as one of the formulas. And no, that it's tougher to find out.
Tanto quiere decir como.
Uh-huh.
Y, may I?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, Alex, please go.
Thank you, thank you. Daniel, not a question, but only a little remark. I think it's worth to add to the investigation one source more. One more source, testament of Alfonso de Weiss. Testament where he, perdón, hablaré en castellano. Testamento de Alfonso X, donde él maldice a su son, a Sancho.
Yeah.
Porque por aquí él habla bastante mucho sobre la natura. No naturaleza, pero sí la natura. Que Sancho hace las cosas que van contra la natura, claro.
Yeah. Well, there's two things about that. In the first place, I think that we cannot be completely sure about what we have now as the testament. So we need a strong study and an edition about that. But I presume that it's pretty reliable. And yes, and this is a very good question, Alex, because sometimes I couldn't say it in the presentation because it's like a shot in the foot, but I think that sometimes there's a little confusion sometimes between nature, natura, and naturaleza. I think that they are creating something. They are creating as they go, and and some things happened with that. So yes, I agree with that. With your remark, it was a good one. Thank you.
Well, if we don't have any additional questions, I guess we can proceed to the next session.